Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Building an Agency, where it is my job to interview successful agency owners and learn what they believe to be the keys to succeeding with a client service business. We cover things like pricing, positioning your service, hiring, and a whole lot more. Today's guest is Kurt Elster. Kurt is one of the most highly regarded
How'd you
independent
pronounce my
consultants.
name?
Elster.
There you go. Okay. Got it.
Kurt Elster. I
There.
kind of like mumbled it there because I was afraid of ruining it. But so Kurt Elster. Kurt is one of the most highly regarded independent consultants in his industry as a senior e-commerce consultant who helps Shopify merchants like Jay Leno's Garage uncover hidden profits in their websites at his e-commerce agency, Ethercycle.
It is a
Ethercycle.
portmanteau of Ethernet and bicycle.
There we go. Ethercycle with
Major
1 million
keyword.
downloads. Kurt is best known for hosting the unofficial Shopify podcast, which he's been doing for 5 years now. You can learn more all about Kurt at his website and subscribe to his awesome free newsletter at kurtelster.com. Now, I first came across Kurt in an interview he did with Brendan Dunn on the Double Your Freelancing podcast. This was probably a few years ago, before I was even really doing client services on my own. But Kurt talked about how he went from being just another website development agency to focusing specifically on Shopify only and not offering any other types of services, and how that actually led to him becoming as busy as he's ever been, happier with what he was doing as a result of that change. And now, really that's where I want to focus the conversation today. And so, Kurt, where I'd love to start is kind of that early moment before you decided to go with Shopify. And I'm just curious, to get started, where were you in your kind of business? What was your business looking like? What were you doing when you were just offering kind of web design for everyone?
So we had, we were probably, I don't know, I think we were like in year 4. So I've been doing this for 11 years now. Mm-hmm. And I've been in 37. I've been involved in e-commerce almost my entire adult life. 11 years ago, I left to start my own e-commerce platform. Well, it turns out that's actually a lot harder to build than one might think. I didn't know what I didn't know getting into it. And we had to keep the lights on. So we started taking on like local WordPress brochure websites. And I sold a website for like $700. Then I sold one for $2,000. And then I sold one for $7,000. By the time I got to 7, I was like, this is criminal. How can I even get away with this, right? And then pretty soon, I thought, maybe we can do some work for some bigger agencies. Maybe creative agencies need assistance in getting into digital marketing, into web design and development. Because this is 10 years ago, right? This is a little bit of a different world. And so that actually worked. It just not a lot of people had thought to reach out to these large creative agencies. And so like within a month of doing that, I'm in a meeting room, downtown, talking about building a site for a boutique hotel that Hilton Hotels owned, right? And so we worked our way up. We did like Verizon, the NFL, and now we're doing this project for the Hilton Hotels. But we're the low man on the totem pole. We're just doing development work. And it was an utter nightmare project. Like everything that can go wrong did go wrong. It is, in the 10 years I've worked, it's the only time anyone has threatened to like get lawyers involved. It was just, it was horrible. And like both sides, everybody involved did things wrong. And so I thought, what am I doing with this? Because at the same time, I had a friend who owned a local bike shop, and he said, Kurt, I hate my website. I said, what do you hate about it? He said, it's hard to manage, it's hard to use. What do you recommend? I said, there's this thing called Shopify. We should try it. And again, not knowing what I didn't know, our first Shopify project was, well, let's design and develop our own Shopify theme. And the company was small at the time. They had maybe 40 to 50 employees. And so they took notice. They said, you should join our thing. It's the Shopify partner program. It's called Shopify Experts. And you are clearly a Shopify expert. You designed and developed a custom theme. Gates open, come on in. And so I got, that was our first project. We shot for the moon and succeeded. Second project, Bandon Dunes Golf Course. This is a very famous golf course. And so, at the same time, I had these moderate Shopify sites, and I had these big nationwide brand name sites. The problem is the Shopify sites where every time we finished, we'd go, that was easy. Well, it wasn't that it was easy. It's that was what we were good at. That's what we enjoyed. Whereas these other projects, we're tearing our hair out. I was literally losing sleep over it. It was horrible. And so I said, why am I doing this to myself? And so when we wrapped up, we completed that project for Hilton Hotels successfully, after many, many sleepless nights. And I said, all right, that's it. Never again. I'm doing exclusively Shopify now. So I just announced it. I said, I'm the Shopify guy. Literally said that. I am the Shopify guy in a newsletter to maybe 500 people. Within a month of that, I was getting referrals to people I didn't know from people I didn't know, because they're like, oh, well, I know you're the Shopify guy. Okay. That's just a thing I made up one day, but it works. Like, that's the advantage of really clear, concise positioning.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, when you were before you made that transition, were you primarily just doing dev work, like contract dev work from these larger creative agencies on like an hourly basis? Like, how were you thinking about pricing at that time? Were you doing like just hourly? What
I had always done predominantly fixed price, project price. So, hey, like, let's meet. Let's agree on a vision. If we can agree on a vision together and we can scope it out and we can define it, and we can agree on an outcome, you know what you're getting, you know what you want, you know what it looks like, I understand this and I accept it, then I could put a fixed price on what that's going to take. And when you have the confidence to put a fixed price on it, all right, that inspires confidence in the client, in you, and in the project. And it makes it easier to get them to say yes. Because if you're like, well, it'll cost between this and this. I mean, who would buy a car if every time you went to do it, General Motors goes, we think it'll be somewhere between, I don't know, 40 and 90,000. Yeah. You're like, well, which is it? That's a big range. Well, websites cost around, very similar to cars. One of the most expensive projects I worked on, 150,000, 250,000 to stuff that costs $1,000, $2,000. Well, there's a car in every one of those prices. Same with websites. It's a lot easier to make a purchase when the person goes, well, this is what it'll cost. This is your out the door cost.
Yeah. So you basically went to these creative agencies and they said, hey, we need to build this for this person. You said, that's going to cost this much. And so you were basically already, I mean, because a lot of people go through like a struggle with figuring out pricing of like hourly or daily or value-based, et cetera. But you were kind of already of the mindset. I mean, maybe you already made that transition of thinking about pricing everything on a fixed fee, or did you just always start there?
So I have an MBA. And a lot of economics classes involved in doing that. And I literally just viewed it as a supply and demand problem. My time is the supply and it's limited. And when I've only got one client, that's when I sold, my first website for like $500. Yeah. And then I got two clients. Okay, next one's 2,000. And so I just kept my fixed price. I just started with simple projects and lower prices. And then I would get more experience. The projects would get more involved and the prices would go up. And I just kept doing that until, by the time I'm selling stuff to bigger brands, I'm selling, like, my fee's $50,000. And then the agency is reselling it for I don't even know what. But doing the fixed pricing also worked really well to get the agency's attention because it's easy for them to build out. And I, like, as part of the service, I said, hey, when you are pitching these projects, you can ask me about it. You could say, hey, what's feasible here? What would this cost? And I can give you those estimates and I can give you work examples. I can help you with your pitch process and you don't have to pay me for that. Like, that was an investment in in keeping myself top of mind. And then the advantage to that is in my contract, I said, hey, I get to publicly talk about the work. And so, these other agencies sell these big clients. Well, now in my portfolio, I mean, up until like, I think 2 years ago, I still had Verizon, the NFL, hotels on our website. Because why wouldn't you? Like, I did that work. Tens of thousands of people entered the Verizon NFL Drew Brees contest that I built. I administered the thing. And so, like, yeah, of course I should shout that from the rooftops. That's my unfair advantage there.
Yeah. Did you, when you were starting out as, doing this, basically just starting with websites, how quickly did you transition? This is even before getting into the Shopify stuff. Were you offering other services? Were you always offering like a wider range of digital, quote unquote, digital marketing services? Or were you specifically websites?
It was specifically websites. And I'd also do content creation. So I was an assistant wedding photographer in my 20s. And that's a good weekend gig. It was good to do while I was getting my MBA. And so I was very experienced and I loved photography. And so I would actually, I'd go when I did like local stores. I'd go into their store, I'd take photos, and we'd use that on the website. I like to get like really creative with it, and like I did a stationery store, and so every background on the site was repeating textures and of paper from their store that I scanned. And so no, it was a wider approach a little bit. It was like, all right, we'll do web design and development and content creation. I think we're like the original core ideas.
That kind of goes hand in hand, and I could see why that makes sense too, because a lot of the times you don't have control over that. Let's just say the photography, which can be, especially in the e-commerce world, kind of can be a boon to trying to make a good looking site. But with that, when you went to the Shopify side of things and you decided, hey, we're gonna specialize on Shopify, you just basically said, hey, I'm the Shopify guy. Were you still doing contract work for previous companies at that point? Or were you like already kind of getting inbound leads for Shopify? So like, how was it a clean transition or?
No. So I said it was actually more complicated than that. I said, hey, we should focus on e-commerce. And I set up a productized consulting service where for like one fixed price, I would do what was essentially like a quickie refresh in place of the site. And then I built a successful landing page for that. And this is where, when you could actually afford Google AdWords. And then I duplicated that site for several different platforms and I bought ads against it. So within the span of 6 months, I was able to do projects on every major e-commerce platform. So it wasn't just Shopify. I did Shopify, Magento, PrestaShop, BigCommerce, Lemon Stand. And after playing with all of them, I was like, okay, well, Shopify that's the best documented. That's where we do our best work. And I didn't just arbitrarily get up one day and make the decision. I'm quite risk averse, which often surprises people. And so I tried all the platforms and said, well, this is the one. Like, I want to be the guy. Like, this is the platform I want to work on. And once I made that decision, I said, I want to be the guy who's known for that. So I said, I'm going to call myself the Shopify guy. I had 500 email subscribers. And I had a lame email opt-in. And we just kind of reworked the website as is to fit. And then that's also when we started the podcast. And the working title was the Unofficial Shopify Podcast. And then I just never changed it.
Yeah, which everybody's like, I wonder, this is a total tangent, but did they ever ask you about like, hey, Shopify in the name, that's kind of like our thing? Has that ever been a conversation, or was it because you were involved that they were just like, whatever?
I was involved early. I suppose I toe the party line. Like, I'm not using it to be critical of Shopify. So like I have intentionally tried to keep my messaging coherent and on brand with theirs, but also at the same time, like, I'm not using their branding, and that's intentional to make it clear. Like, and the name is literally The Unofficial. And from day one in the description and on the website, it flat out said, like, this is not authorized, endorsed, affiliated with, loved by, prefer whatever. Like, it is in no way an official authorized production. Now at any, given all that, I'm sure it's fair use. And after 5 years of doing it, it's clearly with Shopify's blessing. But, at any point, if I get a cease and desist letter in the mail that says, hey, you can't do this anymore, I'm stupid. I'm not going to fight that. I just change the name.
Yeah. It's not like it's that hard, not that big of a deal. I think going back to the whole like specialization idea, I think there's this concept in people's heads that I've, gone back and forth with. Basically the idea that if you choose to specialize, you kind of cut off all the other work. And like, oh no, now that I'm the e-commerce guy, I can't do brochure local websites. And so just like, why you said it's so stupid,
brochure local website.
Yeah, no, not like that's what you want to do. No, not like that's what you want to be doing. But for some people, it's like, oh, I can't do an agency website or something like that. But like you said, that's stupid. Bored. So why do you think? Why do you think that line of thinking of like, oh no, I'm going to cut off all this other work is stupid?
All right, because it's the difference between being a generalist and a specialist. Like, honestly, who makes more money, your family doctor or a plastic surgeon or a heart
Mhm.
surgeon or a neurosurgeon, right? Like a specialist is a specialist, and by definition makes more money. Like you become, by virtue of being a specialist, you immediately become much more likely to be a big fish in a small pond. Like
Mhm.
for me, figure my audience. I figure my audience is around 30,000 people. I'm not getting 30,000. I don't have 30,000 subscribers on anything, but
Mhm.
like combined impressions over 30 days. It's usually around 25, 30,000 people,
Mhm.
individuals across all these different channels and audiences. And so like that's not a ton of people, but how much work do I really need? Right? It becomes
Mhm.
like at any given time, we're probably doing about 8 projects. Well, that's a
Mhm.
sizable income for a business that has very little overhead and is largely profit.
Mhm.
Um, and at the same time, like when you can have that focus and that specialization, you become inevitable, right? Like you spend enough time on Shopify, you will encounter me. If you do
Mhm.
not, it's either we need more time or you're just not that invested in Shopify. So it kind of
Yeah.
becomes like if you're saying I got to hire a Shopify expert, well, it becomes inevitable that you will eventually at least consider me.
Mhm.
And that's the advantage to specialization. So I'm top of mind, right? Like at the top of the interview, I said, I called myself the Shopify guy. 3 simple words, right? But
Mhm.
the advantage to that, if I go, hey, what do you do? And then it takes you like, well, actually, Shane, what do you do?
I do design development for e-commerce stores. So specifically, I'd say that I do conversion focused design for Shopify store owners.
Okay, that was okay, but it was a
Yeah.
little long. If it
Yeah.
takes you more than 10 seconds to describe what you do, in
Mhm.
what universe do you think I'm going to remember that a
Yeah,
day, a week, a
exactly.
month from now? You won't.
Mhm.
But you'll always remember, well, Kurt Elster, he's the Shopify guy. It's so
Yeah.
simple, right?
Mhm.
That's the advantage of being top of mind with that concise positioning.
Mhm.
So, like, if it takes you a while to explain it, well, no one's going to remember
Yeah.
it, and you're certainly not going to think about it later. So that you want, when you're a generalist, you really can't do it, and you're up against 1,001 other generalists who all
Mhm.
do the
And
same
all the
thing,
specialists.
and plus the specialists. So,
Yeah.
like, you are low man on the totem pole. You're just
Mhm.
making it harder for yourself. Whereas if you want to climb the ladder, well, why don't you skip a few rungs and make your life easier?
Yeah. And I think that that's probably the number one thing that people worry about. But at the same time, you've been able to transition to now you're doing SEO audits, you're doing email automation setups, you're doing strategy consulting, UX conversion consulting and things. So like you're not just doing brand new design development of websites anymore, even if that wasn't your core offering before. But I think
Still
that
my core offering. That's
yeah.
I could do exclusively that if I wanted to.
Hmm.
It's really the marketing offerings we do, the other stuff. That's actually, it's not that I want to do that. It is that it is a service for my clients.
Yeah.
And actually on the
They need
marketing, I make
that.
very
Yeah.
little. It's
Hmm.
pure, it really is just it's a customer support and service thing.
Hmm. So when you decide to start like adding those things like on this conversation, when did you really start saying, you know what, we'll do the email automation setup? Like, what was that decision process like? Do we want to do this? Like you said, it's not super profitable compared to just building and designing the sites. Like, what was the thought process behind that?
So because I wanted to have a more complete offering. Like the end goal is not make Kurt money, and the end goal is not
Hmm.
build cool websites for the sake of design. Like, to have a pretty portfolio.
Yeah.
Early on, that's what I thought, and it's wrong. And when I really got successful, when I realized everybody just wants a stable income. Like everyone just wants to feel secure. That's the thing I'm selling. So to do that, all right, well, I've got, they need a website. I've got my core offering. Okay. But I want to make sure that I can offer a great return on investment. I want people to feel confident I want people to say, Kurt Elster made me a bunch of money. And so to do that, I offered other service offerings based around the pains and problems I was hearing from clients.
Hmm.
And and I love this idea of a productized service offering because it's like having a restaurant menu. It's a one piece of paper that tells you at a glance, this is what they offer, this is what it
Hmm.
looks like, this is what I'm going to get, and this is what it costs. It's very
Hmm.
straightforward. And so that's my pricing page on our agency website is just that. It's a menu of offerings. And so then I would put, when I wanted to try something, I put it in a proposal. So somebody would be like, hey, can you do this? I'd be like, I've never done it. I'm interested in doing it. Let's try it. And here's the statement of work. Here's the sweetheart deal I'll give you. And we try it. Was it successful? Yes. Great. Can I get a testimonial? All right, let's write that into a productized service offering. And based on the amount of work it took the first time around, let's try and put a sane price on that based on how long it took me and what kind of value it provided for the client. Can we put a fair price on that? And then you adjust it up or down. Like occasionally, like over time, my prices would go up, up, up. And then like we'd hit the summer slump and then the prices would go down a little bit. Now busy again. It's just supply and demand. Like if I've got 12 clients, more than once I've said, just go to, I said, Paul, just go log in, double the prices. He doesn't ask why, he just does it.
And, that's one thing too, with your, moving into the pricing discussion, you have your prices publicly stated, as you said, and you do change them, as you just mentioned. Now, what made you decide to publish your prices publicly? And I think that there's a lot of debate around this, just for some context of what's in my mind. A lot of people talk about value-based pricing, or, really value-based pricing is like the be all end all in people's minds right now. Is like, hey, well, if they're going to sell, they're doing $100 million in revenue, this email setup is going to do a lot more for them than someone who's doing $1 million in annual revenue. So you have your prices publicly stated. Do you change those? Do you not? Why? Like, why? How do you think about that?
Change those on the website or change those for clients?
Do you change them for clients? Like someone sees it and they say, hey, it's $5,000. I think one of your email set automation setups is right now. Do you say, hey, well, you're $100 million brand or something? You know what I mean? Like that's going to be way more involved. Do you customize it or not?
So for the most part, I don't. For the most part, it's like, okay, tell me about your project. What do you need? And then tell me, all right, well, it sounds like, all right, so for you, here are your three options. Like, let's do the theme setup is option 1. Theme setup plus Klaviyo is option 2. And then option 3 is theme setup plus Klaviyo. I'm adding it up right now. And, you probably got some stuff and some initiatives you want to engage in down the road. So you probably want a flex fund retainer as well. So just prepay for 20 hours of development time. All right, well, now they went on the website, they saw the pricing, and they're like, all right, theme setup cost me $7,500. Store setup cost me over $10,000. I'm not sure which one I'm in. I'll talk to him. But they know, like, I can afford one of those two. And then I go, well, you sound like you're a candidate for the theme setup. There's some other stuff that'll help. I'll send you a 3-option proposal. Now they get a proposal. They went in going, this might cost me, like, I think this will cost me $7,500. And then they get a proposal. It's like, well, it's $7,500 or $13,000 or $16,300. And then most of the time you end up selling, option 2 or 3. So it works out pretty well. But everyone knows up front, well, this is what he charges and this is fair compensation for them. And we know based on our e-commerce experience that this will pay for itself rapidly. And then I actually spell that out for them. I have a Google sheet. I call it my client upside calculator. And I put in like, all right, well, here's their traffic. Here's their conversion rate. Here's their average order value. All right. And so we can now extrapolate out. This is what how much revenue we think they're going to make this year. All right. Now, if just in doing this project, we're able to round up their conversion rate 0.5%, 0.25%, or and increase their average order value or customer lifetime value, by 10%. Okay. Well, they'll make an extra $100,000 this year.
Yeah.
So now suddenly $16,000 for this project becomes incredibly reasonable, right? And then even if I don't make them $100,000, I make them $50,000. Well, the project still paid for itself 3 times over.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious with the pricing, and I think this is again, when thinking about pricing, it's such a hard thing. I mean, now like you're specialized, you've got this core offering, so you can create processes around your services, and you're like, hey, if we're going to implement this for this client, here's the checklist basically that we have to run through, and here's all the things that we could do, which makes it, I think you can dial in your pricing that way. But how do you just specifically say like, hey, here's how long it's going to take us, and so here's what we're going to price it? Or did you, like, just for example, like how do you think about pricing the email flow automation with Klaviyo? Like, how did you come to terms with right now it's $5,000?
It's well, that's also like that's a fair market rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's also representative of like the amount of time and effort it takes in. But at the same time, the guy who does that work has done more of those setups than he can count. So you're
Mm-hmm.
paying for his experience and his time, like at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. It's a true. And suddenly at $5,000, it's like, well, this is a steal. Why wouldn't I do this?
Yeah.
Now, because those are fixed prices, they're also fixed scope. So it's like, well, this is the price, but this is what you get. And if you want more than that, all right, well, then we have to tweak it. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where suddenly, a proposal will be like fixed price plus, where we
Mm-hmm.
say, well, maybe you want these extra 20 hours as just a wild card bucket for, whatever idea comes up. And that's like a safety net. That's risk aversion. A lot of people will go for that. Or sometimes they're like, well, we want this, but we don't necessarily, we want a new theme, but there's like a bunch of extra features we want. Okay, well, that's custom development. In that case, I'd be like, well, the core setup is this, but the advanced customizations, here's line item costs for those.
Mm-hmm.
Pick which ones you want. So just because you offer a fixed price, you have to keep in mind you also offer a fixed scope to go with it. So as stuff gets added or removed, the price changes as well. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be like functionality, features, or work. It can also be timeline. It could be availability, right? Like, oh, do your clients just text you? I had a client once text me on Thanksgiving and go, do you know our MailChimp password? There is no level of retainer agreement in which I offer that kind of service.
Yeah.
And so now I literally, when I onboard clients, I set that expectation. Like there's onboarding packets and forms and pages, and it's flat out in there. So it's like a note about our availability. And so we take Thanksgiving off like because of that. But like that's, if you wanted to say, you have 24/7, 365 access to me. Well, that's a thing you could charge extra for. So it doesn't just have to be about like the work done. There are other ways that you can add if you're on fixed price where you can let people, I want to choose the proposal into a choose your own adventure. And that fixed price offering is that's just one of our options. That's our starting point. And if they choose that option, that's fine too. It means like, okay, this will be a simple, successful, straightforward project for me. But if they choose the other stuff, all right, now it's a big project and it's a fun adventure.
Yeah. When you think about hours, because I know like, again, this stuff can be very tedious, dealing with hours and billing for them and reporting on them. And, when you say like the flex fund retainer for like 20 hours, I love the idea because, me as well, I deal with clients all the time where it's like, oh, a little thing. And I'm just like, yeah, I'll just fix it. I'll just, you know what I mean? But those little things can add up. And then sometimes it's not so little. And I'm like, am I going to send you a bill for a single
when we started,
hour? But
that's what's all right. What you're describing is exactly a problem we suffered with, where I'm like doing all these little 5-minute changes that don't get documented. And like, essentially what you're doing, you are free support. You are free VIP priority support. Why do you not respect yourself? And the answer is yes, you don't. You absolutely do not.
Yeah.
And so we switched it to, okay, if you want that level of access, buy a project and we'll give you 30 days of support as part of the built-in retainer warranty. And if you want more than that, all right, well, I'm not just going to do these like 15-minute one-off projects. You need to prepay for a flex fund retainer. And then I've got a process in place. Anybody who does whatever work they do, they log it in a Slack channel called work log. And it just goes like client name, task I did, time. And then the project manager goes and bills that, either puts that into an invoice that'll get sent at the end of the month, or it goes into, it gets debited against their flex fund retainer. And then at the end of the month, she sends them, hey, here's everything we did for you this month. And here's how many hours you have left, or here's your bill.
And with that, I'm so interested in this because it's such like sorry, I think I lost you there for a second, but with the lag here, but I'm really interested in this because again, like it's a big problem. And I think a lot of people probably struggle with this. Now, when you think about hours and billing, do you say like, hey, a phone call every minute on the phone? Like, cause you can get really like lawyerly with it, where a lawyer's like, hey, if I send you a text message, that's 3.5 minutes that I'm billing you for it. Now, like, how do you think about like what gets billed and what doesn't as hours?
It's whatever you're comfortable with, but it's also like whatever you communicated to the client up front. So generally, I bill for Well, the rule should be anywhere you add value, you should bill for that. You should be compensated. The for meetings, mostly I don't bill for them, but we do have some clients that want like strategy meetings or like a standing recurring call once a month for an hour where we plan for the month. Those absolutely get billed. But just stuff like, I got a quick question. Okay, I just don't. All right, well, I got stuff to do. I just don't answer the phone. I mean, like I flat out say you can't, like I don't do unscheduled calls. So it's just not a thing that occurs for me. And if you do call, I don't answer it. Like, what are you doing? Are you running support out of your house over the phone? Ugh.
Yeah, and so basically it's if you're actually, and like if you schedule a call to talk about using their flex fund hours, do you then say, hey, that 30 minutes that we talked about how we're going to use your hours is also kind of like, because that could be strategy and providing value, but it could also be not.
I probably wouldn't bill for it. I mean, mostly it's like, there's some larger clients where I get sucked into administrative meetings where I'm just there as support to answer questions that you're getting billed for. And even though I'm like just most of the time just sitting there cruising the internet, but if it's like, all right, well, let's have a meeting to talk about how I'm going to spend your money. That I'm not going to bill for. Because it's figuring out the project is providing equal value both ways. Because I'm going to bill for the project we discussed. That's kind of how I think about it.
And then do you roll those hours over, or is it like, hey, you paid for this month and they're gone at the end of the month, use it or lose it? Like, how do you think about that?
I mean, some people do that. I think that's shitty. I don't. The hours don't expire. I mean, I got people who've bought hours and like they've been sitting on the same hours for 2 years. If they showed up and said, hey, like, here's what we want to do. Like, here's what we need done. Okay, great. I mean, I got a client who paid for a project about 2 years ago and ended up in a trademark dispute. And they said, look, I can't do the project. I said, all right. Like, I've raised my prices since then. We could sit on this project and you can redeem it at a later date, or I could refund your money. And they said, you know what, sit on it. Well, like I got some other stuff in the works. And sure enough, 2 years later, we did the project. Similar things have happened 3 times now, to the point where, okay, I find like, all right, well, this could get out of control. So in my, now in our contract, in our master services agreement, which I had a lawyer help write like new sections for me. It specifies like, okay, if something like that occurs, you forfeit the money if like X amount of time has expired. Because I held the time for you. We're a boutique agency.
Yeah. And then exactly. Like the time is set aside. And that's where, I think conversations like often people do upfront or 50% upfront. How do you think about like taking deposits, and are those refundable? Like, how do you think about it? Because these are just, things for me that I'm sure other people struggle with as well, trying to decide around pricing and figuring all this stuff out. Like getting a deposit and then saying there's so many different scenarios of what could happen as to why the project doesn't, it either gets finished or it doesn't. But like, are those refundable? What are like your terms around getting paid essentially?
So generally my threshold's about 10 grand, 10,000 and less, 100% upfront or fuck off. I mean, just flat out. And it really makes the projects go significantly smoother, because what we found is, before you push a project deliverable live to the public, there's always hesitancy where, you've been perfecting your act in private for 6 months. Well, now you're going on the road with it. And how are people going to perceive? And I spent all this money and time on this. And what if we publish it and no one cares or it doesn't work? There's actually, that happens more often than not. Like, it's a business. At the same time, it's a business run by people, and often like a single entrepreneur. And so like they have emotions and egos and fragile egos, and that's okay. So with 100% upfront, like often people work, if someone wants to just sit on their website forever and not launch it, well, that becomes very stressful when you do like 50-50, or you only get 50% once it launches. So if it's under 10 grand, I don't mess with that. I'm like, it's 100% upfront and that's that. And at the same time, okay, I realize that's a big ask. So I say, look, if you find that I am in any way acting unethically, immorally, or unprofessionally, then I will not bill you. And if you find that I'm in any way acting unethically, immorally, or unprofessionally, then I will not bill you. And if you find that I'm in any way acting unethically, immorally, or unprofessionally, then I will not bill you. And if you find that I'm in any way acting unethically, immorally, or otherwise not living up to the expectations that we agreed on in the 30 days, for any reason, no questions asked, I will give you your money back.
Mm-hmm.
That's the trade-off I am making there. So, and I really don't think that is an outrageous claim to make in the slightest. I think that should be the default. I think that's how business in this country should operate. Oh, you didn't live up to what you said you were going to do in the first month? You give the money back because you fucked up. Like, period. And so if it's, but I understand, like, if it's over $10,000, it's a bigger project, it's a longer project, there are cash flow concerns on both sides of the table. So for that, I do milestone payments. If I hit, like, all right, give me 50% up front to get the project started. All right, now I'm like, I've delivered a preview to you and you can give me feedback on it. All right, you owe me a 40%. When the darn thing finally goes live and we get through your myriad revision requests, final 10%. So like, you need it just, everything needs to be equitable and fair on both sides of the table. And I think that payment structure does that. As long as, like, the 100% is a big ask, but it really makes things go a lot smoother. And I just say, look, if I'm not living up to my end of the bargain, you can ask for a refund. It has to date never happened.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that, I think about these things all the time with, clients, and is it refundable? Is it not? Is it, and I had just not even going to get into it, but funny stories. But, I know that we're coming up on 11:15 when I said I would let you go. So I just want to ask you, kind of like, just to wrap things up. I mean, we talked a lot about specialization and choosing, why you should specialize and pick kind of a topic so you could be the big fish in a small pond, and then talking all about pricing and figuring that stuff out. Now, what I'm curious to hear from you is, if someone is in a position similar to mine where they're looking to make the leap of going from just being a freelancer to actually starting an agency or a brand around their service, what is like I know there's so many things you could say, but what is the number one thing that you would recommend people do as they're making that transition?
Document it. Work in public. That is the easiest way to be a prolific content creator, because it's a habit. It's a skill. If you spend all your time like just doing everything privately, no one is going to toot your horn for you. No one's going to know what you're doing, and no one's going to give a shit about you. If you go out there and you're like, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm excited about, this is what I think's really cool today, you're going to build that habit of that prolific content creation. People are going to share in your enthusiasm, and you're going to develop a reputation around the things that you're enthusiastic and excited about. Like my social media, that's all that is. You are watching me learn and work in public. When I see something that I'm like, this is cool, or this is what I'm proud of, I screenshot it, write what I think is valuable, what that learning is. That is as much for me as it is for everybody else. Then I put it into my social media tool, and then like 6 weeks later, it finally gets published, because I do this multiple times a day, every day. So like, document that whole journey, put it online, and miraculously, you will find like-minded people who come to you. And it really does not take long to start to build a tribe and audience. I think it was like Trent Reznor said, hey, you just need 1,000 true fans. He's like, all I need is 1,000 people who believe in me and my music and will buy what I'm making. Yeah. Wildly paraphrasing. But if you just Google Trent Reznor, true fans, you'll find this quote. And he's absolutely right. Like, if you're sitting thinking like, oh, I need to be a generalist because I need to have an audience of 1 million people. No, you don't. I mean, I had more work than I knew what to do with when I had 3,000 people on my newsletter and following me on Twitter, right? Like, it's just, you don't need more than that. And so having that abundance mentality and knowing that like it'll keep going because there's an economy of scale here where you just don't need that much work. It'll pay off. So I think my point is like, if there's an overlap between what you love and what you can get paid for, lean into it, document it, share it, be enthusiastic about it, and the money will follow. And like, there'll be mistakes and you'll have to adjust and revise, but it'll absolutely pay off.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kurt. This has been really awesome. I wish I could, and maybe in the future, as we get to episode 30 and 40, 50 of this show, I'll ask you to come back again. But Thank
Absolutely.
you
Yeah, come
again.
back.
This was really awesome. And I'll let you know, I'll follow up with you. Well, one thing I just want to ask so I can include in show notes, et cetera, is like, where should people find you? Maybe what's like a good resource that people could go to learn more about you, what you're doing, and where people can, connect with you.
Well, if you want to see what I'm up to, check out my Now page or Twitter, kurtelster.com/now. It's also very cool. It's all 8-bit themed. A lot of fun. But on that website, you could sign up for my newsletter. That newsletter comes from my real email address. I've scrubbed my email address from the internet. The best way to get it, sign up for my newsletter. And if you reply to it with a thoughtful question, I will probably send you a thoughtful answer.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.